welcome everybody to this lovely webinar with Bruce Whitfield, who's written a fantastic book called The One Thing. Congratulations, Bruce. But firstly, I want to say congratulations on this amazing business practice that you're starting after the Money Show. We miss you a lot on the Money Show, but Stivovo, our colleague, Stephen Curtis, doing a great job there.
Oh, Stephen Curtis is doing such a great job. Who cares?
Yeah, who cares? But you're making such a lovely life. And how's it going for you?
You know what, Ferial, it's that thing where you give up something that is your life, and it was very much my identity. And I remember my late lovely cousin, the man who ran the most successful breakfast show in South African history, Jeremy Mansfield, once telling me how about 6 months after leaving the Rude Awakening, he had all the health issues, of course, which ultimately caught up with him. But he was in a queue at Pick n Pay, and he was aware that somebody was eyeballing him. So he turned and smiled at the guy behind him. And the guy said to his little girl next to him, he said, "You see that guy there, darling? He used to be Jeremy Mansfield." And so I feel very much like I used to be Bruce Whitfield.
Really?
And it was a thing where when I gave notice that I wouldn't be renewing my contract in April this year, and I had this real sort of 3 a.m. wide awake dread of what was going to come after, because a 20-year habit is a big habit to break. And it's been liberating. And I am involved in a very big project I can't talk about with Professor Dr. very important Adrian Saville at Gibbs. And we are collaborating on a wonderful project, which I hope to talk to you about one day. But it required various rules and regulations and things having to be boxes to be ticked. And I was I've got extra 6 hours a day. What can I do with those extra 6 hours a day? And that's when the realization came that this was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to do a project that I'd been wanting to do since June, July 2021, when I read a speech that Lesitsha Kganyago, the Reserve Bank governor, gave in Stellenbosch. And he uttered what to my mind is the immortal line, and that is, when everything is a priority, nothing is a priority.
Nothing is a priority.
He was making that point based on the fact that there are just so many crises in South Africa, so many things that we have to focus on and fix, so many things that are broken and neglected, and people are suffering in the real world. But if we try and fix everything all at the same time, there's no way that it's going to work. And subsequent to that, of course, we've seen the creation of Operation Vulindlela, which was very much a Pravin Gordhan project, which started, incidentally, in the corridors of Davos in January of 2016, or was it 2017? But when South Africa was on the bare bones of its backside, where nobody was coming to the South Africa stand at the World Economic Forum, they were more interested in that particular moment. I think Argentina was a bright and shiny new toy. And nobody cared about South Africa. And the most melancholy CEOs and government ministers with nobody else to talk to all sort of stared at each other and went, well, what are we going to do about this? And Pravin grabbed the nettle and said, right, let's form the CEO initiative.
So Vulindlela is three things, right?
Vulindlela is energy and energy, logistics, and the other one, which is very, very important. And thank you so much for throwing me under the bus on that one. But they're focused on three key priorities, and it's a case of let's focus on these things, and then we can do that. And that's what the private sector and government are doing at a very, very high level and getting, I think, some breakthroughs. But it was that moment where there was that, and a moment where I was in a
so you were
shop.
there in the museum in Davos.
Yes, and watching this thing happen.
Nobody come to that lovely venue where I've been once.
No, it was amazing, but nobody was interested. South Africa was so dead and so hopeless. And Jacob Zuma had thrown his name away for the umpteenth time, and people were just bored. They were tired of being lied to. They were tired of being made promises that were never being delivered on. And they were just overwhelmingly frustrated with South Africa constantly making promises and never delivering on them. And then, of course, I'm in a barber shop, and the barber's doing the very best with the limited resources at his disposal and cutting off a hair here and trying to preserve as much of my dignity as possible. And suddenly I said to him, "Stop!" And he went, "What? What have I done?" And I said, "If you were president for half an hour, just half an hour, and you could do one thing, what would it be?" And he got so emotional, and he just went, "Crime." And I said, "Well, tell me about crime." And he then told me what it was like living on the Cape Flats and stepping out of your door every day and having to make the trip to the corner to get the taxi and going on the taxi, getting the taxi rank, and then getting to the safety of Dewaterkant and then having to make that return journey home each and every single day. And he said, crime. He said, everybody in my community will tell you it's crime. And what's so interesting about the One Thing book, which I started off, sorry, I'm taking over, but that's okay.
No, it's lovely. And sorry for my dogs barking.
And I sent 120 WhatsApps to people, and I just said, if you were president for half an hour and you could do one thing, what would it be?
And they got back to you quickly, huh?
And I just said, listen, there's a clock ticking here. I've got very little time. And at the same time approached the lovely Terry Morris and Andrea Natras at Pan Macmillan, who are the MD and the publisher of Pan Macmillan. And they looked at me and said, you're mad. You're never going to pull this off. But sure, if you can pull it off, we'll publish it. And I said, right, if I can get you a manuscript within a month, then can we have it out by the 1st of October? And they went, of course.
Amazing.
And they didn't believe that it would happen. And very few people had to be asked twice. A couple of people ignored me, Mandy Wiener amongst them, but Stephen Curtis did. He responded. Most people responded immediately. And it was really gratifying to see. And I was very conscious of the fact that I wanted this to be in their voice. So there was minimal editing. Gershwell Brooks ignored who works with the Nelson Mandela Foundation, ignored the brief completely and sent 2,000 words. So
2,000!
I made him rework it a bit. So he gets a few more words. But as Wayne Devenhage at Outers said, the cheeky bugger didn't even write his own book and put his name on it. But I was the orchestrator. But it was
very good. I just want to show people that's it, and it's doing so well, hey? Bruce?
With notes and everything.
You
just stick those in randomly.
Everything. Yeah. So it's climbing the charts. It sparked people's imagination.
But this is the thing where we are an astonishingly enthusiastic, passionate, patriotic, ideas-filled society, and so much of that has been kicked out of us through the abuse of the lost years, dark years, wasted years, call them whatever you like. And we need to start owning that again, because the amount of entrepreneurial creativity, the amount of desire to fix a country that has got so much potential is so strong that it is something that, I'm loving the feedback on social media where people say, well, my one thing would be this, my one thing would be this.
I wanted to ask, are people doing that? Are they telling you their one things?
They are telling me their one things. And one of the many things in the book is I left a blank page at the front and a blank page at the back. And I said, right, before you read this book, write down one thing you would do. Now read the book. And at the end, has your one thing changed? Has it altered? Have you become a bit more focused, a bit more realistic? Because as Nikki Newton-King, the former chief executive of the JSE, says in the book, it's much better to have a small idea that is implemented than a big idea that's left in a conference room and never happens. Absolutely. It's a bit like the National Development Plan, this most astonishing document, which had we followed its guidance when it was delivered to us, we would be light years ahead of where we are now. But, it was undermined and it was challenged, and people were critical and saying, well, whatever the minimum wage at that time was, that's not good enough. No, we're not buying into this. And instead of saying, let's do small incremental steps, let us take, and it's not going to suit everybody. And I get that people are impatient and desperate, but we must start somewhere.
Somewhere. I was on one of these webinars with Trevor Manuel and Rolf Meyer shortly after our post-election world started looking a little bit hopeful and interesting. And Rolf Meyer said, we have the National Development Plan, but sadly it's been put on the back burner, to which I think Trevor replied, actually, no, it's been put in the freezer or the bin. I still think it's a great document.
And Trevor was the poster guy for that thing, because he was the chairman effectively of it, and he was the only person. He did roadshows. So many events I went to, Trevor was there talking the National Development Plan, and everybody loved it. But without a champion, without a structure, without an executive, without a direct door to a president you can trust, you cannot possibly.
It gets lost. It would probably work better now with the GNU, where there's competition and at least more light at the end of the tunnel.
Yeah.
So when I finish reading the book, and I'm not sure if it's because the context is so different, I really felt happy. Have people told you that? You feel hopeful and optimistic after reading it, and you do feel like it's doable. We have so many challenges. That's the sense I got out of it. What are people telling you as they begin to read this book? It's just come out. Huh?
So many people have gone through the book and are absolutely loving the messaging in it. Some of the ideas in it, and well, there's one particular idea that's very Kim Jong Un. I don't know
Okay,
if you
yes,
got to it.
I did.
It's Pablo
Is that
Fatides.
Pablo? Oh, can you
Pablo
believe
Fatides wants
Pablo?
everybody to do compulsory community service and to be basically marching and singing songs and doing forced learning of certain things. It doesn't necessarily gel with where I am as a person, but it's his perspective. And frankly, you know, a little bit of self-discipline in a country is never a bad thing. But community service certainly is a good idea. It's another idea that the founder of Spark Schools, Stacey Brewer, puts forward and says, actually, this, medical students have to go through a Mandela, they call it the Zuma year. Perhaps everybody should have to go and do it. And again, logistically, I don't think we're there,
So
but create programs.
Ian Fur, the founder of Sorbet,
Yeah.
very considered person. He also says we should have non-racialism classes because he's very concerned by how by how fractious our race relations are.
And it's been his thing for the last 35, 40 years. He got into trouble because he was putting black managers in charge of his supermarkets in downtown Johannesburg during apartheid. So he's lived this stuff and he's taught it, and he has really made a huge impact in the world. But I think he's also feeling very frustrated that we are not better at appreciating each other's differences and embracing those differences and using those differences as a strength. But back to the original question, a very positive feedback. People are, I think, feeling uplifted, and it's about the art of the possible, Ferial. It's about,
Yes.
and at the book launch in about 2 weeks ago, we did it at Exclusive Books at Hyde Park, and I thought, how do you do a book launch like this? And book launches can be a little bit like, a bit self-indulgent and a bit, isn't your book wonderful? Yes, my book is wonderful. Well, how wonderful is it? It's very wonderful. And you have this to and fro thing, and people like that, and it's fine. I just thought, let's turn it up a little bit. So I invited Mteto Nyati, who is the chairman of Eskom, and I said to him, would you be interviewed on your one thing? Can we narrow it down to one thing that you've done at Eskom over the last 2 years, because it's almost 2 years to the day that he has been since he became chairman. And instead of talking about the book, let's talk about one thing and the power of small incremental steps and how you can take something, a utility that's broken for 16 years. There is zero hope and a deterioration of hope. And people in Eskom are miserable. Everybody out of Eskom is miserable. It's like in 2008 telling anybody that you were a banker. People were ready to nail you to the closest tree. If you work at Eskom, people despise your existence because you're not fixing it. And Mteto was just brilliant on it. And at the end of it, people came up to me and said, "Oh, we thought Mteto was going to interview you about the book." And I said, "Yes, but wasn't it better?" And it's that, and just changing it up a little bit.
He's not in the book, eh? Mteto. Did I miss it?
And so this was my power, because he was one of the first people I contacted, and I said, I know that you're a bit busy at the moment, but if you could come up with 500 words, and he missed the deadline, and he was very apologetic, and I said, well, now.
Yes.
And somebody like Imtiaz Suleiman, I
he's
would love to have in the
betting on a
book, but
dark,
again, so busy.
too busy. So betting on a darkie, which is Mteto's book, is a real guide. I
It
love
is.
reading it as a leadership treatise and also a how-to book. What was his one thing? What was his answer at your book launch?
And it's so difficult to nail it down to that one thing, but I was persistent. And ultimately, he categorized, said, if it's one thing, it was about leadership. And I thought that was a bit big and a bit general, but I accepted it coming from him because he's had some success at this. And it was that thing where when the president approached him about 2.5 years ago, and he said, look, we've got a problem. We need you to be the chief executive. And he said, well, the president's not a friend of mine. We don't know each other socially at all. And I felt no pressure whatsoever. So I declined the job of chief executive. And I said, but I'm, willing to be chairman. but I must have a firm say in who's on the board, and the board is very engineer heavy now relative to what it was, countless other times before. And we're going to be a very hands-on board. And in the first 2 weeks, he told me how he then did a national road trip visiting the most problematic power stations, going through head office and talking to everybody he could get hold of and trying to distill to its barest essence what the problem was. And it came down to issues of leadership. And I don't know if you read Andre de Ruyter's book, and
Yes.
and I'm sure Andre had some
A comparison of the two books has been really interesting for me to do, to see what happened there.
No, completely, but Andre de Ruyter, he just couldn't buy into the language and the ideology of the ANC and found them to be a dinosaur organization stuck in a dinosaur age and not making progress, and that frustrated the living daylights out of him. And you can imagine that would have led then to some very serious conflicts at board level and dealing with ministers and all of that sort of thing. And it comes down to the point of, and various people in the book make the connection. And you may be brilliant. You may be a great technocrat. You may be a very capable manager. You may be very efficient and doing really good at doing a job of management. But you put the wrong person into the wrong environment, and they will struggle to make progress. And it comes down to the very core essence of what I see as the core essence of this book. And Mike Abel, the advertising guy who's just bought out the M&C Saatchi business and called it something much more creative, and I can't think of what it is. But Mike Abel has got on a poster behind his desk, it's from an old ice hockey coach saying, "The people with the best people win." And he plays on that, and he talks about the Springboks, and he talks about the Rassie-Sia relationship. And
so Mike wants to make Sia president and Rassie deputy.
And here's the thing. Grant Patterson does this as well. And Nick Benadell, who also didn't make it into the book because he didn't meet the deadline, but Nick Benadell, the wonderful founder of Gibbs, who's very, very busy man too. Very, very keen to, he sort of said, Imtiaz Suleiman should be the Minister of Social Welfare. And I said to Imtiaz, do you want to be the Minister of Social Welfare? He said, no.
He said, hell no.
Does Sia want to be the president of the country? No, he doesn't.
No, he wants to be the captain
of the
Springboks.
Let people do what they're good at. And some people are really good inside government, and some people are really good outside of government, and you need both. But it is about the best people with the best people win. And that goes to Mthethwa's philosophy at Eskom. So he changed managers at power stations. He changed people within head office. He then brought in the new executive team at Eskom, and they brought about the notion that Eskom could be fixed. And Mthethwa's biggest thing within that broad thing of leadership was he exercised leadership. And he then said, okay, so we have to procure locally in order to do the repairs on the broken power stations, the brand new ones that don't work. We have to use local artisans and people who don't know how these machines work and had nothing to do with putting them in place to fix them. And no wonder it's not getting done. And so we were seeking bubblegum and sticky tape and press stick on the holes in the tubing in Mudupi and Kusile, whatever that was, and just weren't getting to the nub of the issue. And he went to the various government departments, particularly National Treasury, and says, you've got to change the procurement rules. If we have to follow your procurement rules, this thing's never fixed. And suddenly a light went on at ministerial level within the National Treasury, and Ido Godongwana then went, okay, if that one needs to be done, let's do that then. And they also then budgeted 30 billion for diesel. So they did burn diesel, and these gas-fired turbines are very expensive to run, and they're designed to pick up the slack during peak hours, of course. That's the way they were designed. But then they've been used too often, so they were becoming at risk. But they burned more diesel than perhaps they should. They went to 33 billion, I think was the number he said. But while they were doing that, they were then getting the right people in to do the right job at the right time and do the right repairs.
And now they're burning less diesel.
Now they're burning less diesel. Now, I mean, there is a little bit concern that things aren't so lacquer. This morning I see at Mudupi and Kusile once again. So we're not out of the woods yet. I started
we're 202 days out of the woods. I hope it stays there.
No, exactly. And but the best illustration of a South African's mindset around the country and around electricity in particular. So we had about 200 people at the book launch. And I said to them, so who here has downloaded and used the Eskom Push app? And everybody puts up their hands. I said, all right, now keep your hands up. By a show of hands, only those of you who have deleted the app can put your hands down. And about 5 or 6 people did. And it was this most wonderful illustration. I turned to him and I said, see, they don't believe you. And I then said,
right.
and I said, have you deleted the app? And he said, yes, I have. I said, is everybody in the room at liberty to delete the app too? And he said, I'm confident you can delete the app. And we'll see.
I hope we can. So you know what struck me when I looked at this wonderful contact list of yours who just wrote. They were unpredictable and interesting. Almost nobody wrote what you'd expect them to. Some did, but most people, their passions, their one thing is out of their lane. Did that strike you too?
Absolutely. And I was so excited by that because one of the concerns that the publishers had was, well, if you go into banking, they're going to give you banking issues. If you go into
banking stuff,
education, and everyone's going to have a vested interest. Very few people exhibited a vested interest. 1 or 2 did. But again, it was they're experts in their field. And if we can make the country better by applying their practical knowledge, then absolutely, it's a worthwhile thing. But I loved how Stacey Brewer, who is the founder of Spark Schools, I would have thought that she would go to childhood education and stuff, and she doesn't. She goes to community service, and people go to interesting places because it's what they feel strongly about. And yes, it is a very powerful phenomenon within the book.
What was really interesting for me is that our popular narrative is that capitalists or business are really self-interested. That's why the WMC of the Guptas, the narrative of white monopoly capital, caught on so easily because of our history. There are these perceptions. In fact, all the business people, most of them in here, they write about things that are often education, sharing about the country. And I guess do you think that's a bigger trend? Is that something you saw in your money show over many years? It's not the self-interest of say, a business audience in the US or even in the UK.
I think ultimately, all of this is about self-interest, because if you live in South Africa, if you have a home in South Africa, if you have your family and your ancestors buried in South Africa, it is your home. It is, you want it to work. And you want it to work because you want your children to be able to have a future there if they choose to have a future there. You want to be able to live your life in a most pristine and beautiful place with lots of hope and potential. But you realize that there is this steady spiral downwards, and it is becoming unsustainable. So I think it has forced many people to refocus their attention. I think if I had asked business leaders and civil society leaders the same question 20 years ago, we would have got very different answers. And I think, there's this conjecture, but I do think we would have got a more self-serving, the business of business is business, which was Milton Friedman, I think, from the Reagan days.
Like and now, lower taxes, no minimum wage. I mean, those classic arguments. In fact, maybe it's a different set of people. So Robbie Rosen, founder of Nando's.
Sorry, I think we've evolved, Ferial. I think people have evolved and have come to the realization, or maybe they're just nicer people, but they've come to the realization that you can't run high-functioning businesses in a dysfunctional environment. And you can't live a high-functioning life in a dysfunctional environment. And so if the environment is not conducive to everybody's success, then you're always going to be at risk of having it taken away, whether it be by prescribed assets or violent revolution or whatever the case might be. All of these things are feasible and, frankly, can be easily legitimized, particularly in the social media world, as a positive strategy to get back what is yours and what belongs to you, because all of these guys want to do is preserve their wealth, and it's all about protecting themselves. It's not about you. And frankly, we forget that the companies that make the profit, that pay the taxes, that pay the social grants, that occasionally tar the roads and fix the potholes, all of the, without those people, the country doesn't function. And so,
Fair comment.
throw it all away, but you're dead.
So take someone like Robbie Brosen. What's his big idea? Huh?
So I love Robbie Brosen so much because, and am I allowed to swear on this webinar if I quote someone
Please,
else?
yes.
Okay. So I've known Robbie Brosen for many years, and about 2017 or so, we come into the end of the Zuma era. Trump is in the White House, and MAGA is in full swing, and there's a greater swing to the right across Europe, and the world is feeling just yuck. And Robbie Brosen is, if you know the story of Winnie the Pooh, there are a couple of characters, and my favorite sort of thing is most South Africans are a little bit Eeyore. They've got their head down, and like, you say, what a beautiful sunny day, and they say, yes, we're going to get skin cancer. Whereas Tigger is the enthusiastic one, and Robbie Brosen is the ultimate Tigger. And he bounds over to me like this. And he goes, "Sit." So, hello, Robbie, how are you doing? No, man, I've just been around Africa with Kingsley Holgate, and we've got goodbye malaria, and we're distributing massive numbers of mosquito nets, and we're making a difference. Oh, that's great. World's fucked, eh? And I said, pardon? And if you quote me directly. And I just laughed like a drain. And I said, what do you mean? And he went, suddenly we don't look so bad, because everyone else was looking so blooming awful. And South Africa was a standout pariah.
We're looking even better at this moment.
No, exactly. And so that sort of attitude is very, very infectious. And that inspired my first book, The Upside of Down, and then focused on Genius, the second book, and now this one. And I got Robbie, who, again, can't follow an instruction, nor can he grill a chicken, he tells me, but he can market the hell out of a drumstick. But so Robbie is central to a group, and I don't know when last you went up to Constitution Hill, but it's been a bit depressing.
He took me on a tour of the Flame Studios in that wonderful place.
And just, we had the what was not the everlasting flame, but there was a flame there, flame of democracy or whatever. And then, the city of Joburg cut the gas off, so it went out. And it's just this sense of despair around the place. It's looking a little bit tatty. And so out of that comes this concept of Jozi my Jozi. And he gets a whole bunch of business leaders, people like Adam Craker and others, as Anglo-American downsizes its head office in Main Street and moves to Rosebank. There's this empty office space. What can we do with it? So they bring Taddy Blatcher into it, into that space, and start to reinvigorate education and opportunity within the Joburg City Centre, which has got some wonderful little areas.
Beautiful. They've got the Risick Street fountain turned back on, and the Nelson Mandela Bridge lights are on, so it's symbolism
and it's those things to show that you can make progress that are so important. Who needs a fountain? You don't need a fountain, but a fountain is like, hey, that's cool. That's a really nice thing. It becomes a rallying point. The fact that the Joburg Library has been a mess for so long is frustrating as hell. But Jozi my Jozi is this initiative to try and resurrect the city of Joburg. And Robbie's idea is, well, decide on what the cordon is going to be, but pick a street, pick 4 different streets, and say within that block, if you start a business and employ people, it can be a tax-free zone. Imagine the opportunity that exists, and the opportunity, of course, for lots of people taking advantage of a gap here. But if you started a brand new business and you were willing to go into the downtown Johannesburg and to employ people in downtown Johannesburg, and this doesn't come from nowhere. If you've ever been to the Nando's head office in Lawrenceville, you'll know across the road was the old, what was it? It was a mattress factory or a laundry or whatever it was. But it's now the beautiful Victoria Yards area. And at one stage, it was basically going to become a slumlord's paradise, and people were getting licensed to build dreadful accommodation there, and it was just going to further exacerbate the urban decline of that particular part of town. And instead, Robbie campaigned very successfully. Victoria Yards is now full of the most astonishing entrepreneurs, people who create. Seppo Jeans has started out there and has got this wonderful little factory where people are making stuff. But the vast majority of the people who are employed by these small businesses, these creative small businesses that are in Victoria Yards, are from a 2-kilometer radius. And so there's a huge vested interest in those people who work there, who make their livelihoods there, to ensure that it stays safe and stays awesome. So, and then people from the suburbs go to
Yeah,
Victoria, spend a Saturday, and
absolutely. So
more
then,
money. And you
and
do that
so
on a larger scale, in downtown Johannesburg, it's not
mm,
unfeasible that
you
you could
you
come up
see
with
it
a formula
beginning to
that makes it work.
change.
Yeah.
You can see it changing. So Siboniso Kumalo, the CIO at Old Mutual, he quotes the guys who won the Nobel Prize for Economics, Darren Acemoglu and James Robertson, the search up Why Nations Fail. Share with us his one thing.
You're going to have to forgive me, Ferial. It's been a very, very busy
It's
month.
been
I
it's
don't.
been a while. Okay, I would
No,
focus on
but
transforming.
Sibon Niso
Hmm.
is the chief investment officer at the Old Mutual Investment Group, and there's some very basic reasons why nations fail, but at its very core is when people lose faith in the future, and
Yes,
so Sibon Niso and people like Michael Jordan, for example, who effectively is saying, give people title deeds to land, give them
yes.
a piece of the future, and if you don't own the future of your country, why do you care about it? Why do you give a
Hmm.
damn what happens if nobody is going to give you a break, and you've come from this dreadful past where you may have had access to land 100 years ago, your family had access to land 100 years ago, and was taken away from you. So Michael talks very passionately, and as a banker at heart, he understands the power of having an asset that you can borrow against.
Hmm.
And
I
suddenly
love his idea
capital.
of title deeding at mass scale.
Absolutely. And suddenly imagine if you own a piece of ground, whether it be 3 by 3 meters or 30 by 30 meters, whatever it might be, that you can improve, that you can develop, that you can either borrow money against, or if you put up a structure, there's not going to be a guy in a red overall or, and a hard hat and a bulldozer coming to chuck you off. You can start putting down real roots, and real communities can form. It changes the
That
dynamic.
theme runs through. I have a question about whether the book suggests that we're changing our national culture, which for me has always been, and perhaps because of our past. When you ask, they say people always say yes, but the problem is. Whereas this time we've actually got a whole lot of solutions thinking. Do you think we're changing, or is it just the people you chose and you're briefed to them?
When it comes to chose, okay, so it was fairly random. I was like,
Was
who's
it?
likely,
What?
who's smart, who is likely to respond? Some people I just didn't bother sending to because, yeah. And who do I want to hear from? So this is again,
Mm,
this comes from a particular point of bias and a particular ideological view that I have, that we can be better, and we've got people who can help us to be better. And so why don't
mm.
we tap into their thinking? And so this isn't everybody. That you'll find there's not a trade unionist in there. There isn't a person in
A
government in
government person? Mm.
there. There isn't anybody, because I just I want solutions. And so
Mm.
you go to
Okay,
solutions
so it
mind.
was a curation for solutions-minded people. Okay, let's
Absolutely.
look at two. So Sim Chabalala of Standard Bank and Adrian Enthoven of Yellowwoods, they have similar ideas about professionalizing the public service and the senior ranks thereof as a key way of breaking through our growth, investment, employment problems. Share with us their thoughts.
I mean, you do. I mean, and again, the 80s was an era of small government and get government out the way and let the private
Yes,
sector
yes.
do everything. And I think we've learned that that
Are we
doesn't
past
work,
that?
because
Yeah, yeah.
and thank goodness we are past that. It's an era of collaboration, which is complicated.
Mm.
And I recall you name dropped Trevor Manuel, so I'll drop him straight back at you.
Yes, yes, yes,
Um,
please.
at a budget breakfast 10 years ago, probably, he was no longer finance minister, but he was a guest with his wisdom. And he was bemoaning the salaries, for example, that were paid to people like Andrew Donaldson, who was the deputy DG. And he said, Andrew Donaldson is a consummate professional and earns a fraction of what he could earn in the private sector if he chose to go there. And he was very clear about Andrew Donaldson at the time, and Andrew left, I think, fairly soon after that. But if you want to attract professionals into the public sector, and you want to do it on a sustainable basis where you can hold them accountable and they behave like professionals, and they're not government appointees, they don't have political affiliation, they just do the blooming job that is required, which is to run a
Mm,
department and to do it to the very best of their ability. And
mm,
if they fail, they're gone. And so you get a very clear sense. So Sim's very clear on every society that works well has a good professional civil service. And Eddie Enthoven is very much the same on that particular front and takes it a step further in terms of remuneration and paying private sector salaries into those positions. And, being
But also
ruthless in
saying you must
management.
leave them alone.
Yeah.
These super DGs, if you get the right people, let them choose their teams and don't interfere with them.
And somehow you have to be able to have oversight of that as well, because you get the wrong person in, or you make the wrong sort of value judgment. I remember talking to Pravin Gordon about this and saying, just explain to me. And this was
When
in the time
when the late minister was having that war with his DG, was it then that you had this
no,
convo?
not even to that level of detail. But this was when he was out of a job on one of the many times where Jacob Zuma kicked him out, and he was sort of on the speaking circuit, and I would see him fairly often. And I said to him, typically, how does state capture work? And he would say, well, what would happen is you would get somebody on a board who went bad or was corrupted, and they would then angle for somebody else to come onto the board, and then two good people on the board would vacate because they didn't want to be associated with the bad guys.
Yeah.
And if you could become the chairman of the board, then suddenly you had a lot more power, and suddenly you could surround yourself with a bunch of corrupt cronies. So you get the wrong person in the job. So there's got to be some element of oversight. There's got to be a professional standards body, effectively, or I don't know how it would work, but you've got to be able to get rid of people who don't perform, and you have to be able to remunerate people who do perform well. And one of the key themes that comes through the book, and many people talk about the Singapore model
They do.
of government. And Singapore, this muddy little patch of nothing with not a single natural resource to its name, and with absolutely nothing going for it. There is no reason why Singapore should be successful other than somebody took a decision to go, let's make this a place of excellence and commerce and discipline and governance in Southeast Asia. Let's turn it into something exceptional. And it was done with precision over 60 years. And Singapore now has some of the happiest people in the world, some of the highest standards of living, some of the highest sort of personal incomes in the world, based on the fact that one of the biggest ports in the world is in Singapore. They've been very strategic in creating a financial center. So many of the people in Britain who became Brexiteers and then realized they made a terrible mistake, people like James Dyson of the vacuum cleaner guys set up a big office in Singapore. The Oppenheimers have got a big office in Singapore. Many companies that were headquartered in Hong Kong have moved to Singapore, because Singapore is increasingly seen as this place that is very, very rules based, very clear on commerce, very understands completely the power of having rules and governance. And it's that idea that in a place with absolutely nothing, you can carve out a center of excellence that everybody aspires to be and wants to be in. They've just got a new prime minister who was videoed getting onto the equivalent of a low-cost airline, sitting in the front row closest to the exit, but getting onto the plane, and the plane erupts with applause. He acknowledges the plane, everybody leaves him alone, and he gets on with his business. And it's
and always when we
billion
do this
rand motorcades and security guards and nonsense like that.
400 million on VIP guards. We don't need that. Whenever we have discussion on Singapore, people we often ask the question about, but are we willing to do the trade-offs? You trade off some personal freedoms for that society, or what's that, a version of the good society. I was interested that Wandile Sihlobo thinks we should be exporting nachos and avos and macadamia nuts and all the great things we do. He's such an interesting agricultural economist and a farmer. Huh?
No, but exactly. And I mean, and so the whole narrative around land has been so interesting for so long. I grew up in an agricultural family in the Free State, and I couldn't have been happier to run screaming away from, the rigors of agriculture. It is a flippin' hard life. I don't want to understate it one little bit. My dad farmed for 60 years. And when he finally retired at the age of 82 and went to go and live in the Eastern Cape and take it easy, He got to 85, and I said to him the one day as I was leaving after a visit, I said, "Why are you so happy?" I said, I
Mm.
thought you'd be dead by now. And he said, I've
Yes.
got no pressure anymore. I don't have to worry about watering the animals. I don't have to worry about, families on the farm and livelihoods. And I'm not responsible for anything anymore. And that was
Mm.
a big breakthrough in my thinking on agriculture. And Wandile has been, of course, instrumental in all of the work that has been done in the background of land reform in South Africa. It's an absolutely critical issue. But so many of the big noisy mouths around land reform are completely oblivious to the complexity of the issues, are completely oblivious to what it takes to own land and the complexities of extracting value from that land and the sustainability of that land.
Mm.
And Wandile has been an absolutely pivotal
What a
force.
voice for, yeah.
Yeah, and
And
beyond a
then we
voice,
also
he's a
meet,
force.
uh,
He's a force for this.
yes.
But South Africa's export potential is so enormous, and you took the citrus. South Africa is the second biggest citrus exporter in the world
Yeah,
after
I
Spain.
was surprised to find that. It's
Yeah,
wonderful.
and we got, and again, dry land agriculture is more tricky, but often we have excess of maize which we can export. And you want to have an export industry that doesn't impact the price of food and the quality of food on our shelves at home. Yes, you need to ensure that you are self-sufficient, but
Mm.
the capacity of South Africa to grow wonderful produce and send that produce all over the world is enormous. And I do think it is valued and appreciated, but I think it can be far more aggressively encouraged and driven and there's some amazing producers. But in order to do
Mm.
that, I remember a friend of my wife's from school is a very successful fruit farmer near Tilbach. In the Western Cape. And I was giving a talk at a wine farm near
Mm.
there, and he said, "Could you pop by? I just want to pick your brain on land reform." And he was ready to pack everything up
Yes.
and get out. And I just said to him, just stay calm. It's like ignore the noise if you can. And I know it's really difficult, and you've got young kids and you're frightened for
Mm.
their futures, but you've got 100 families that depend on you on this farm, and you've got this, you've spent so much on infrastructure. You're not going to get the money that you've put in out by selling, and just bear with me. And when I last checked, he was still happily growing his nectarines
That's
and
great to
growing
hear.
his
Mm.
produce for the
So,
world.
so
You need
Bronwyn was
land
interesting.
certainty,
Carry on.
security,
Yeah.
and again, even landowners, even people who have these great assets also need to understand that they've got a place in the future, and that's got to be secure.
Absolutely. So, to Bronwyn, who's the flip side of Wandile, Bronwyn Williamson of the Futurist, I thought she's going to futurescape for us the one thing, and hers is really interesting. It's feed babies.
It's just the most wonderful thing. And at the moment I opened that email from her and I read it, and I got
Mm.
tears in my eyes, which is
Mm.
very easy to do. But I got tears in my eyes because it was
Yeah.
just such a fundamental thing. I remember in writing The Upside of Down in 2019, I got into the rabbit hole of research on early childhood development and stunting, and the fact that when you get to the age of 5 and you've been malnourished and you haven't grown properly and your bones haven't developed and your little
Mm.
brain hasn't developed properly as a result of your body almost devouring itself, you will never catch up. There is nothing that
Never.
can be done for you because developmentally you are just so deeply, deeply disadvantaged. And her thing is, yeah, we can do education, we can fix the roads, we can fix potholes, we can lock all the criminals up, but nobody on earth has got a fair chance of success, no matter how
Mm.
brilliantly they are genetically designed at
Mm.
birth, if they cannot develop. And
Mm.
just feed babies. So before you get to
Uh,
education,
that
before you do anything else,
that was the one that really
yeah, it
made
hits
me
hard, eh?
want to be activists. You must feed babies. We have to ensure that
Yeah.
we deal with stunting, especially because we are the well-endowed country that Wandile writes so beautifully about. Huh? So
Nobody
Reedy and
Nobody
mm,
should go to bed in our country hungry.
nobody.
It's a flippant
It's
disgrace, and we
a
should all be ashamed of ourselves, frankly.
Absolutely,
It's diabolical.
and food can be cheaper than it is, but let's leave that
Yes.
now. I don't want to be the problem is person. So John Scottness, the son of Cecil Scottness, his dad at some point says to him, "Time to cut the bullshit, sonny. Get an apprenticeship," and that leads to that story leads to his one thing, huh? Which is similar to Reedy's. Huh?
Yeah, absolutely. And so, I mean, so John Scottness's dad was Cecil Scottness. If you've got a Cecil Scottness in your house, look after it very, very well
Yes,
and
very,
insure it.
very well.
And so John Scottness is an artist in his own right, not as good as his dad, and his dad exhibits what his parents sometimes have to do, and it's horrible to do, but exercise a little bit of tough love, and that is go
Yes.
and get an apprenticeship. And for so many people who didn't have a great educational, great academic ability, they would go off into, in those days, the railways or into some sort of government-owned institution, state-owned
Yes.
enterprise, and there would be the opportunity to become a boiler maker or become an electrician or become a plumber. And apprenticeships for people who can't afford the training, people who are looking for practical guidance, who maybe don't have the academic ability, who can't understand electrical circuits, but can know how to wire a plug. It's a way for people to do it. And apprenticeships have fallen by the wayside. And we need to have an industrial scale entrepreneurial breakthrough, but on an industrial scale, apprenticeship breakthrough as well, because apprenticeships, and I think they've gone out of fashion in most parts of the world because it takes a long time and there are lots of abuses that go along with it because these, especially youngsters, are almost held in slave labor by some people, but you can work around that. And it's about passing skills on from generation to generation to generation so that
Very
people
nice.
have got a way of having pride in themselves and taking care of themselves over the long term.
And what I loved is your your former apprentice, self-called Miss Reedy Klavi, now in the US. She says a similar thing. She says, "How can you?" I can just hear her say, "Give me one thing. I have an encyclopedia to write." And then she says, in the US now, she finds she's paying so much um,
Artisanal
for
skills, yes.
hairdressing, for artisanal skills, for plumbing, for whatever. And she comes with to the same idea. It is really these commonalities, the golden threads across the book are really interesting. So I can chat to you for the whole hour or more, but we have many questions. I just have to go to them. Here we go. Famatula, hi.
Some people are writing in capital letters, so they're getting quite shouty, which I like, because
Okay,
this
good.
book is designed to provoke ideas and conversations. And if you don't
And
like the
it
ideas,
does.
that's fine. It's okay.
So well done for your big story, for your big stories. Bruce just mentioned the Saab governor. My question then, okay, why is Saab backing out of an agreement for the new company withdraw funds to pay the creditors worldwide? I'm not
I
sure. I
don't
think
know.
that's too
Sorry.
specific a question else to don't.
Off topic, and I don't
Yeah.
know the answer to your question. Ask the
Jacques
governor.
de Jager, I'm keen to buy the book, but seems shipping is available to addresses in SA only.
Yes, but
Just
you
for
can get
your
a
expat.
Kindle copy. You can get a
Kindle copy.
Kindle
Okay,
copy. It's a
Jacques,
wonderful thing.
you can download. Um, Kerry, on the topic of Dorota, I read an article about Dorota and Nampak and how under his control there was a huge reduction in the share price. Was that true?
Absolutely. So, I mean, Andre de Ruyter took on Nampak, and and again, it's so dangerous when you judge people based on isolated things. So you for example, you could look at the former and I'm blah, blah, blah. Let me try and gather my thoughts here. Andre de
Okay.
Ruyter, let's stay specific. Andre de Ruyter took over Nampak, which was on a steady slide down. It needed a radical intervention, which he didn't implement. But again, chief executives come in and they present a strategy, they create a strategy, they go to their board of directors, and the board of directors okays the strategy, and off they go. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Companies are very, very complicated things, especially multinationals, especially companies operating across the African continent. Difficult to invest in some of these countries where opportunities exist. And sometimes you go and you put big plants in, like they did in Angola, for example, and it all looks very exciting on paper. And suddenly the regime goes mad and you can't get your money out, and gradually your profits fall. And I think Andre de Ruyter got caught in that particular trap. I don't know if he was a good or bad chief executive
I mean,
at
it's good to
Nampak,
read in
but
the.
you can't
Tito
judge.
Mboweni
Yeah,
hired him there. Do you remember that?
I
Yes, I
do.
forgot
From
that.
Tito. And
So, may rest
I
in
found,
peace.
sorry, Ferial, just as a small aside,
Mm.
I was very sad when Prem Gordon died recently, but I was just like, I was so surprisingly moved by Tito Mbowene's death last weekend. And
I think we all were.
and he was just anyway, as an aside, we were
Did he ever
ideologically
tell
quite.
you what his one big thing was? You and he were the best of friends.
I got him on the radio to do that in my last week on the radio, and he said,
Mm.
"Make Bruce Whitfield finance minister." And I said, "Have you been drinking Rubicon again?" But no, so and he got very sort of away with the fairy sometimes, did Tito. Surprising for a guy who held the Reserve Bank
But
on a very, very short leave.
so well loved across lines. That's the lesson of his life for
Not
me.
everybody loved him. Well, there were some people who didn't like him very much. But he was tough as nails, but he had a spirit and a warmth, and he was naughty, which I liked about him.
They also like pulses. So Bruce, who gave you the best answer? That's Johan. I wasn't going to ask you that one.
Who gave you the best answer? God, it's so hard. Ferial likes the Bronwyn answer. It's like having a favorite child. I loved the surprises that came through. So I loved Michael Jordaan's giving land back to people. I was surprised by that. I like mine the best of all. I mean, okay, if I'm going to be really blunt about
yours. You love
I
yours.
like mine the best because it's one, it's mine, and two, it's doable, and three, everybody can do it, and you just need to be human about it.
Mine was to give people hope, the audacity of hope. And then I see Adrian Gore also sits. I wrote it down in the beginning. From Terusha, a sequel book interviewing MPs, high-ranking government officials, and the question should be, what is one thing you have done that made a meaningful contribution to make positive change in South Africa?
Welcome to Write It. Good luck with it. One, getting hold of them. Two, getting a response. Three, having anybody giving a damn enough to actually respond to you. But nice idea. And I'm not sure I want to read that book because it's history, and we need to be failing forward, not failing backwards. I think we fail backwards far too often. And I'm not sure that politicians are necessarily always the answer. They're necessary because that's the way democracy works. But the less we give them to do that matters, I think, the better.
Johannes is saying, and I was going to come to it at the end, but let's do it now. So our Stili Haralambus of the DM contributed. I thought
he did, and okay, there's somebody with a vested interest. My goodness gracious me, did he take a spoon and stir? No, and again, essential in talking about media freedom, of course, and the importance of media freedom. And I go back, and I sometimes wake up at 3:00 in the morning in a cold sweat, and I remember Yusuf Abramji sitting in Parliament the day that the spooks put in cell phone jammers in Parliament. And it was, and the standing up and chanting in Parliament about, unblock the signal, whatever that chant was.
Yes.
And if Jacob Zuma had been at half the capacity of some of the world's worst despots, we would have been in very, very serious trouble. Luckily, he was bloody useless at everything, and couldn't have organized a piss up in a brewery. So the country could have been far more seriously captured had he been half competent. So luckily we didn't go down that particular avenue. But yeah, media freedom is essential, and I mean, I do a lot of work in the world of media freedom, and I'm very critical of media, and I'm critical of some media. I'm critical of the way in which media follows social media trends. I'm critical of the underfunding of media, all of these various things that we know about. But if you consider just for a moment what people try and get away with media in an environment where you are potentially under scrutiny, imagine removing media from the world. Imagine switching off television, switching off radio, switching off even social media, which I'm not a fan of. But imagine cutting everyone's access to information, what the consequences of that would be. And I know that media is not perfect, but nor is the law, or nor is medicine, and nor is anything. But there is a core of remarkable, brave people who are dying in the Middle East every day, going out to try and tell a story. You may not like their perspective, you might not like their coverage, and that's your prerogative on it. But my goodness gracious me, they've got to be there. They're putting their lives on the line, and the huge amount of courage. And I mean, you were at the receiving end of some of the Gupta bloody nonsense. I think I saw you sitting on a cutout of Anton Rupert's lap at one point. And
I don't even know the guy, man.
But you can say that. But this deep desire to undermine media, and you've got Musk on his pluck. Musk is a brilliant guy, but I wish he wouldn't mess with something he doesn't understand, and he doesn't understand freedom of speech and media really. Freedom of speech isn't just freedom to say whatever you like. Freedom of speech has consequences, and what you say matters, and therefore having a really well-governed, reputable media is absolutely pivotal to freedom and democracy. And I think
absolutely,
broadly
you miss
speaking,
it when it's not there. When I kind of my places I wanted to go to was Iran, Ethiopia, Vietnam, and when you're there and you realize that there is no free media, that what you've seen was not a true reflection, you really appreciate it when you come back home. Huh? So we're right up on the clock.
For all of the flaws of our media, and of which there are many, and we all have transgressed, from time to time and made mistakes and all of that sort of stuff. But it is, on balance, are we better off with a free, vibrant, independent, vocal, annoying, frustrating media? Yes, I would argue we are.
Amartya Sen in democracy is freedom. I forgot it. Development is freedom makes that point, and I've always thought it right. Huh? So I was going to get to your lovely brother, but now we have 5 minutes. So it was good to meet him in the pages of the book. Will you take us out of this lovely conversation by reading from your one thing, please?
I'm kind of torn by this, because do I give it away, or do I force people to go buy the book to find out?
Okay, then let's talk about your brother. Let's talk about your brother.
No. I want to do my one thing. My brother is lovely. Okay. My brother's contribution is considered to be more valuable than mine, because my brother he's a good person, and there are tens of thousands. There are probably 10,000 people in South Africa who wake up and do similar things to my brother. It's not nepotism. It's just the one story I could absolutely verify and be very comfortable telling
what it was.
About community activism and going, the city around me is falling apart. I don't like the fact that the city around me is falling apart. Let me do something about it. I can't do it myself. I've got a bit of money. So why don't I go and get some people to help me? Where do I get people to help me? Well, let's go to the local homeless shelter. Let's give some people in that space hope. And he's had a group of homeless guys, a core of these guys who've followed him from project to project. And the most recent one, cleaning up St. George's Park in Gqeberha, and getting park runs in there and opening a public space back to the public, rather than to a very scary bunch of people who are desperate.
Story.
They shouldn't be desperate, but they are homeless guys living there and making it an unusable space. But to my one thing,
yes,
and I was cautious about this, and I bounced it off my wife, who went, "You can't say that." No. And I said, well, I'm going to do it because I feel very strongly about it. And I then tested it in a call like this with Terry Morris and with Andrea Natras from Pan Macmillan. And I said, if I see any flicker of doubt in your eyes, and I looked at them like this and I stared at their eyes, if I see any flicker of doubt, I will not do it. And I mentioned what I was going to do, and they both beamed at exactly the same time. And they went, yes, you must do that. And I'm very proud to say that Terry took the book home to her family, and she's got twins, and she read the book. Only that chapter to the children. I said, did you have to explain to them what it is? And she said, I didn't. I said, does that make you happy or sad? And she says, I think it makes me happy. And it all emanates from walking down Baker Clark Street one day, February, hot as anything, 10 o'clock in the morning, no southeaster blowing that day. I'm in a suit because I've got to go and deliver a talk, and I'm looking for the address. And Cape Town decided to take numbers off buildings just to upset everybody. I don't know. Maybe it's a rule that Cape Town has. And I'm frustrated as anything. And the next thing, everything went into slow motion. And this beautiful young woman walked towards me. And naturally, she caught my eye, and I saw she had writing on her T-shirt, and I just burst out laughing. And I just went, does it make me what it says on your T-shirt if I say I like your T-shirt? And she said to me, well, it all depends on how you say it. And I said, well, if I said to you that it could replace the Constitution, the 10 Commandments, every religious rule, the King Code, and she looked a bit blank at that point. She didn't know the King Code, but that she went up in my estimation at that point because that's quite dull. But it can replace every single rule in the world if we all did just what your T-shirt says. And she smiled broadly. She went, exactly. And she wafted off down the road, and it was just lovely. And yeah, just a slogan. And I make this a motto now. And it's don't be a doers. Don't be a doers. If we all simply took that as a value system, and it's a very South African thing. It's different to don't be a dick. Don't be a doers is a very particular thing. And I struggle to explain it. But if you're driving down the road and somebody steps into the road and you hoot at them, why? They don't want to be hit by your car. They made a mistake. Don't be a doers. Somebody cuts you off in the traffic. Don't hoot back. If somebody pulls a sign at you in the traffic, don't do it back. Why would you do it back? Don't be a doers. Let them be the bad person. Smile and wave. Apologize if you've done something wrong. If you're going to cheat in your taxes, don't be a doers. If you're going to do something horrible to somebody else, if you're going to complain in a shop, yes, you can complain in a shop, but don't be a doers about it. Don't be a doers.
Lovely.
It's rule number one and the only rule. If we all followed it, the future would be brighter.
Lovely. Have you seen the brand that's Be Lekker? I love that one. Don't be a doer, be lekker.
What, the Lekker Network?
Mm.
I'm an ambassador of the Lekker Network. Bobby Skinstad and I are ambassadors of the Lekker Network. And it started out in the mind of a man called Nick Latouf, who is an advertising guy in Cape Town. And he didn't have time to actualize it. So he's handed it over to somebody called Renewal Lombard, who is taking it very seriously and is creating a global network of like-minded South Africans, people who find themselves for various reasons, the scatterlings of Africa, if you like, as Johnny Clegg would sing about, and find themselves isolated, alone, maybe a bit lonely, a bit miserable, not having a network of their own, but really stepping into the breach and saying, when somebody contacts you and says, hey, I hear you remember the Lekker Network, you say, how can I help you? It's the only thing you have to say. And it's about creating this thing that we have in South Africa. We call it Ubuntu, if you like. And for the vast majority of people, it is something that's very real. We're very personal. We're very good. I think, are a good global tribe. And we need something that connects us. And the Lekker Network is aimed at doing precisely that. So yes, thank you for mentioning the Lekker Network, of which I'm an ambassador.
Congratulations on this beautiful book.
Why are you cutting me short? I've only just begun. Thank you.
Yeah, because we have to go now. Thank you very much, Bruce Whitfield. Lovely to chat to you.